Advisor, Sustainability and ESG Collabs. Annabel Nelson is a finance and sustainability expert with over 25 years' experience in global financial service firms. She is the strategic advisor on ESG and sustainability to collabs, levering technology to develop pragmatic and commercial solutions, enabling firms to direct finance towards a sustainable and just transition of the global economy. Please welcome Ms. Annabel Nelson.
Good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to the GSS for inviting me. So, I spent my career focused on capital, both raising it as a corporate issuance and deploying it for business development and for investment. And working in life insurance, savings and investments, my focus has been on the drivers of capital to support profitable growth and risk. So, coming here to talk about ESG, the first question is, what is it? Well, environmental social governance is core to corporate strategy and how business, investors, and all stakeholders make decisions. An entity's ESG is a function of its business, what it does, and of its behaviours, how it does it, and its disclosures, so how it communicates to the world at large. Why does this matter? Well, it informs our perception of a company. That could be internal. So if you're a board member, you might care about your employee relations or your succession planning. If you're a consumer, from an external perspective, you might choose to buy product A over product B because of its environmental credentials. If you're a bank, you'll be interested in a firm's ESG because it informs you of their credit risk. So ESG factors inform and they provide insight on the risks and opportunity an entity faces and how it's managing it. So, why has ESG become such a big trend recently? What's the big deal? Why now? And here's where I want to talk about sustainability and draw out the difference between ESG and sustainability. Sustainability is the ability to meet the needs of the present without jeopardising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So sustainability is an outcome. The problem is our global economy is not sustainable. It's demanding the resources of 1.7 Earths to support itself and manage its waste. And carbon emissions may be causing global warming, but the impacts are being felt through the water cycle. We've altered rainfall patterns. The complex, interconnected Earth systems regulating our environment have changed, and this is raising the risk of irreversible change. It could lead to cascading effects causing severe social and environmental impacts. And don't think this is some kind of future doomsday scenario, because research shows that climate change caused the recent drought in the Amazon, the biggest for over 100 years. And this affected 30 million people across Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Bolivia, with significant social and economic impacts, including drinking water shortages, crop failures, power cuts across the region, loss of river life, and more wildfires in one of the world's most biodiverse regions. The Amazon remains a net carbon sink, but only just. Scientists believe it's near a tipping point, and were this to happen, the direct physical effects would be felt much further afield in the Amazon because of the Amazon's water cycling affecting rainfalls across large parts of South America, but also important farming zones in the US Midwest and as far afield as the Tibetan Plateau and the West Antarctic ice sheet. And the global economics of this would be widespread due to our interconnected economy. Reduced rainfall would cause double-digit yield losses of crops. in South America, it would cut hydroelectric capacity by 75% and disrupt major shipping routes. And to give you an idea of scale, the Panama Canal, which is very vulnerable, today handles $270 billion of global shipping traffic. So our global economy is consuming nature's resources at a rate faster than it can sustain. And like carbon, all goods and services have a water footprint, reflecting the fresh water consumed over the entire supply chain. And 50% of that water footprint, 50% of the water footprint from high-income developed countries is unsustainable, originating from areas of high water stress, and at the current rate of consumption, there will be a 40% global shortfall in freshwater supply by 2030. So these are systemic risks to human health, food security, livelihoods. This is why finance is interested. This is why finance cares. And thankfully, this is also a political issue now. In 2015, 196 countries signed the Paris Agreement to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. And many countries have enacted net zero commitments, policies and targets. But nearly 9 years on, carbon emissions continue to rise. There is policy misalignment, and that's putting us on track today for a global warming of 2.7 degrees by the end of the century. And I think, as the previous speaker mentioned, global average temperatures have exceeded 1.5 degrees for the last 13 months. However, it's not all bad, because at 2015, when the Paris Agreement was signed, we were on a warming trajectory of around 3.6 to 4.9, depending on which models you were looking at. So we've made good progress, but that's not enough to save the coral reefs, the polar ice caps, or the mounting glaciers that supply water, fresh water, to over a quarter of the world's global population. So the shift, the policy and regulatory goal is to shift the global economy from the needing 1.7 Earths to the 1 Earth's resources that we actually have. And this will require a major change in how we produce and consume, shifting from a linear economy to a circular one. But the scale of this transformation will cause risks and opportunities for countries, businesses and individuals across the entire value chain. And this isn't going to affect everybody equally. So this is why there's a big focus on a just transition. So the key requirement for this is taking a whole systems approach and a mindset shift in the way we think about value, because financial value, and there are a number of accountants in the room, financial value doesn't currently fully capture the costs of environmental and social impacts. And these affect the real economy. So we as companies, capital providers and communities need information that enable us to value both the impact of a company, of the world on a company, but also the impact of a company on the world, double materiality. So we need ESG data that is relevant, that gives us information, enabling insight to make decisions and take actions, and crucially, to provide transparency and accountability. So a key trend is the growing regulatory focus of both environmental and social sustainability. And we've seen voluntary frameworks, so like TCFD and TNFD, which were mentioned earlier. But mandatory regulations are now emerging, and this is exemplified by the EU Green Deal, which aims to make the EU carbon neutral by 2050, and crucially decouple growth from resource use and ensure inclusivity for all. And the clever thing about the EU Green Deal regulations, although it's taking a while to come into force, is they're looking at the whole value chain. So the first element is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which requires large EU companies and crucially non-EU companies companies that have a large proportion of their revenue, which are non-EU but based in the that come from the EU. And firms are required to identify and mitigate the sustainability risks and impacts on human rights and the environment. And that covers the whole supply chain, which requires them to engage with their supply chain to get the data. The second clever bit is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which requires companies to disclose. And the third element is the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which aims to redirect capital towards sustainable finance by ensuring transparency and preventing greenwashing. So the shift towards stakeholder capitalism that we've also seen means companies can no longer solely focus on shareholders. They must now consider the needs of all of their stakeholders for long-term success. This includes not just investors, but employees and customers, but also their entire supply chain and the broader community. But here's the challenge. Who exactly are your stakeholders? Potentially, they're everyone. Sustainability is future-focused, subjective, and it varies depending on where you are. What matters in London may not be the same if you're sitting in Lagos. So it's not possible, necessarily, for firms to balance conflicting stakeholders' interests, but they must be able to explain how they've considered their different stakeholders' needs and priorities, the actions they've taken, and why they believe the actions they've taken are appropriate. And this has to be backed by ESG data. So it's no longer enough to simply claim sustainability efforts. Businesses now need to be able to prove them with hard data that meets evolving regulatory standards. And this is driving investment in compliance tools, audit systems, and integrated reporting. But there has been some backlash amongst those who argue that business should solely focus on maximising shareholder returns. And the and the argument is that this disclosure and the regulatory burden is value destroying. Think about the stats. We're running out of water 40% by 2030. As a result, some policies are being delayed or weakened, and some firms are scaling back their commitments. However, keep in mind social norms are shifting. Businesses and finance are expected to act responsibly, facing not just reputational risk, but also the growing threat of litigation. And in recent years, we've seen a really big uptick in litigation, filling the gap left by policy and regulation to drive and accelerate the pace of climate action. The latest annual report on the global trends in climate litigation shows that the number of cases has grown not just in terms of number, but also by country spread. And in addition, board directors themselves personally face an increased risk of litigation because of the growing pressures to look beyond shareholder value as part of their directors' duties. So, in our VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, decision makers must start to use scenario analysis to model plausible futures. However, the quality of these models depends upon the inputs and assumptions used. And I'm giving examples on water, and that can lead to water as opposed to carbon. If you're using appropriate assumptions, you can have significant blind spots. So the network for greening the financial system, that network of central banks and supervisors, has identified water risk as the dominant nature-related financial risk, and that includes climate, by the way. And they flagged that this could constitute 729% of global GDP at risk. And last December, they said, and I quote, "Today, nature risks are not priced into financial markets and are not accounted for in the scenarios used by financial institutions, central banks and supervisors, leaving the financial system exposed to potential systemic risks, as well as contributing to the misalignment of capital flows with societal goals." So it's promising that regulations are expanding to include broader E&S factors, as the demand for sustainability will grow because the problem's getting bigger. And with advanced AI tools now available, we can more effectively analyse sustainability issues and gather relevant data and make informed decisions. So, as I conclude, remember this. ESG is not merely about risk mitigation. It's about unlocking innovation, driving growth, and building resilience. Finance isn't just about allocating capital, it's about shaping the future. Companies that invest in their ESG strategies today will lead the way tomorrow. So let's continue to push forward in building a future that is both profitable and sustainable. Thank you.